Hello, everyone. Welcome to DisrupTV. My name is Vala Afshar, Chief Digital Evangelist at Salesforce and your co-host for the next hour. Please follow us on Twitter at DisrupTV Show. Send Esteban and I your questions and our guests, and we'll try to respond live using hashtag DisrupTV. It's my pleasure to introduce my co-host, Esteban Kolsky. Esteban is the principal founder of ThinkJar, an advisory and research think tank focused on customer strategies. He loves it when I introduce him.
I'm giddy with excitement of being here.
Esteban has over 25 years of experience in customer service and CRM consulting, research, and advisory services. Most recently, he spent 8 years at Gartner focusing on customer service and CRM. When he was there, he coined the terms EFM, Enterprise Feedback Management, and CIH, Customer Interaction Hub, which we hear all the time. In addition, Esteban researches and writes on social networking topics that have led to today's revolution and has assisted Fortune 500 and Global 2000 organizations in all aspects of CRM deployment. You can follow Esteban on Twitter at eKolsky, E-K-O-L-S-K-Y. Welcome, Esteban, to Disrupt TV.
I would love to meet this guy. He sounds very interesting. I just want to make sure that everybody understands I'm co-host for the day, since Ray finally got caught up without a time machine, and he's stuck in an airplane somewhere over the Atlantic. So
it took 67 shows before Ray was caught in the air, which is awesome, because now we get to have you on the show. Now, speaking of awesome, I want to introduce our first guest, Mike Kail, CTO at Cybrick. Cybrick was founded by security professionals who understand the problems enterprises face when it comes to hardening security posture. This team of security experts created a continuous security as a service platform to make it easier for companies to sharpen their defenses against increasingly sophisticated security attacks. As the CTO, Mike is responsible for strategic vision, technical direction of the platform. Prior to finding Cybrick, Mike was a Yahoo CIO and SVP of infrastructure, where he led IT and data center functions for the company. Before that, Mike served as VP IT of Netflix, so companies you might have heard of, Yahoo, Netflix, where he was responsible for employee technology and various engineering components. He's been widely recognized for his insightful industry commentary on social media, and was named recently by Huffington Post as one of the top social CIOs to follow. You can follow Mike on Twitter at MDKail, M-D-K-A-I-L. Welcome, Mike, to Disrupt TV.
Thanks, Vala and Esteban. Great to be back on the show. I think it was roughly a year ago I appeared. It's really
absolutely great to have you back.
That's too bad, because we probably have nothing to talk about. Security in the last year has been completely off the news. Nothing going on, right?
Nothing's happened at all. It's been quiet.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your company before we start.
Sure. So our CEO, Ernesto Batista, and I founded the company roughly just under 2 years ago. So really trying to take on the problems we both faced on the buy side as CIOs, CTOs, of, year after year, we purchased disparate tools trying to solve the problem around code and application security, as well as meeting some of the regulatory requirements like PCI DSS. And it's just a frustrating endeavor that's always manual and periodic. Meanwhile, hackers are certainly not doing this periodic, and whether they're script kiddies or more experienced, they're taking an automated approach. So how do you level the playing field? So what we've designed or architected is really a cloud platform that automates and orchestrates all of the existing best-of-breed open source and commercial tools into a single pane of glass, policy-driven framework. So if you look at the previous solutions as being vertically focused and manual, we take a horizontal, automated, orchestrated approach, and then give you rich analytics over time, ultimately driving towards the holy grail goal of automated remediation.
So Mike, I mean, I was half joking earlier, of course, about not being anything in security, because we all know what's going on. But here's a question to get things started. Why are we so much more focused on security now than we were in years past? I remember 20 years ago, 15 years ago, we were talking about security, but it wasn't such a big issue. Why has it become such a big issue now?
If you look at the mega trends of cloud, microservices, digital transformation, and certainly mobile, everything today is an internet connected device. and internet is much more prevalent in our everyday lives. I mean, if you think back in 1995, like when Netscape browser came out and like Amazon was just launching, the only security thought about was not putting your credit card into the browser and entering it and, doing e-commerce. Now e-commerce is driven by Amazon and others, is a continuous everyday occurrence. And with also the rise of social media, the number of attack vectors has greatly increased and is increasing every minute. Meanwhile, security has been a manual process, always kind of left behind. So I think now we have to take a renewed focus on it.
So is it more because there's more places to get into the organization that it's become an issue, or because there's more people wanting to get into the organization?
I think it's a confluence of both. I mean, the population's increasing of people connected. Also, if you look at iPhone and Android devices, plus the incentives of the hackers and bad guys to get access is even greater.
And how's the understanding from the CIOs and the architects and the organizations evolved over the last, let's say, 10 years? I mean, do they get how complex this is, or they're still thinking, I'll just get a security vendor, plug it in there, and somehow it works?
I think a lot of times people are looking for a magic pill or panacea to solve the problem, or unfortunately, they view that the regulations and compliance are good enough. So if I do a PCI scan twice a year now, I'm good because I check that box. But if you have developers doing continuous delivery to production, you can literally make a change a second after you receive that compliance and be out of compliance with respect to security posture.
But is it really compliance, or is it more just like, making sure the organization doesn't get attacked and breach and problems emerge that you didn't expect? Because compliance is one part of it, right? But it's not everything.
I think if you look at GRC, so governance, risk, and compliance, people need to think about risk as this elastic entity or asset, not a static point in time exposure.
You've talked about in the past a need for continuous security and visibility, and that's not just a shift in technology, but also shift in culture and shift in processes. And I know you've talked about, and you focus on code and application security, and your advice has been for organizations to adopt a software development cycle and really think about designing for security early on. Can you talk a little bit about what's required to shift an organization so that there is that sense of urgency and capability when it comes to continuous security and visibility?
Sure. So I think the meme is called shifting left. So how do you shift left and bring security testing and assurance earlier into the SDLC? And that there's technology that exists to help you do that. As you mentioned, and as I've talked about, it's really a cultural shift and mindset and trying to bridge the chasm between DevOps and SecOps. So if you look at the cultural adoption of DevOps in the past, that helped create this collaborative culture between development and operations, security was left behind. And I think we need to bring security into that collaborative pipeline to create the culture of DevSecOps and take an automation approach to bringing security in, instead of having the security team be this barrier to deployment or running manual tests after delivery.
How easy or how efficient would that be to do? I mean, it sounds really complicated. You have DevOps, which are mostly developers and developer operations people, and SecOps, which are people that are more tasked with infrastructure and low-level problems. So how do you actually bridge that chasm? How do you bring them together?
I think so. Why, part of the reason why we started Cybrick and this whole notion of a continuous security delivery fabric is, how do you implicitly bring security in without requiring developers to do something outside of their normal behavior, and give context around why you're doing this, instead of kind of focusing on the technical how. So providing much more context instead of the previous contentious after the fact conversations that occur between security teams and the development and infrastructure guys.
Is it something that could be done outside of the cloud? It sounds like, to get efficient processes regardless of technology, the cloud is like, man-made for that. Man-made, of course it's man-made. it's a heaven sent thing, right?
Cloud definitely enables this, but I mean, you can have software-defined infrastructure on-prem through VMware virtualization environments or OpenStack deployments. It's not limited to just public cloud providers like AWS, Azure, and Google.
So what you're saying is like companies shouldn't expect to get on the cloud to have a complex setup or a hybrid cloud setup or anything like that to get on security. This is something that needs to happen regardless. I mean, the other thing that I wanted to ask is agile development versus traditional waterfall development cycles, right? Is there a problem? Is there a problem that you see for security in any of this? I mean, if you're deploying every week, how do you make sure that happens?
I think you need to be agnostic to whatever methodology you're using in the development cycle. I mean, whether it's waterfall, agile, whatever you want, whatever you're using, and you also have to be agnostic to the environment. I think many times CIOs think they have to have a well-defined agile methodology as well as a complete public cloud presence before they start attacking and solving this continuous security with code and application. Where you can start what I call it the far right with application security and pen testing. You can start in the middle with static code analysis and software composition analysis, or you can start at the far left with analyzing source code as you check it into something like GitHub. So you can start either way and then expand out and start improving your security posture. So going from A to Z instead of thinking I have to have the whole alphabet in place before I can do something. And that's the paralysis that often hits CIOs, at least what I'm kind of seeing out in the field.
So who do you mean when you go and visit clients? Who are you talking to? Who is the person that you talk to the most? CIO, CEOs, chief securities?
Sometimes it depends on the reporting structure, but it's typically the CIO who brings in the CISO to that conversation. So ultimately, it's who has to go present to the CEO or board of answering that simple but difficult answer question of how secure are we?
So without breaking security, I'm sorry, Vala, go ahead. I can go forever. But.
No, go ahead.
I was saying, without breaking security laws or trust of your customers, what's one of the most interesting conversations you recall from the last few weeks or months that you had with the CIO about this issue of security? Something that you go like, wow, this is really bringing the problem forth for me.
I think the overarching term is really visibility. And CIOs really lack visibility today. So I'll use the hedge fund industry as an example. And with the advent of Docker containers and kind of this rise of the developer economy we're in, you now have quants doing Docker development, pulling down Python and R third-party libraries to build out their algorithms and models. The CIO has no idea about this shadow development that's going on, and they could be using pulling down Docker images from untrusted registries. They could be using out-of-date third-party or open-source libraries that have common vulnerability and exploits in them, or they're just not using the same version of that package or library across all of their code repositories. So doing kind of visibility and correlation is the start of the process. And I think surfacing that is the first thing that kind of gives the CIO this like, oh, okay, this is probably something I need to pay attention to.
Do you feel like you have to bring that to them? Do they need to, do they understand that? And I'll shut up after this, Vala, I promise.
So the approach Ernesto and I take is really what we call this trusted advisor approach, where we go in and have a conversation and understand the landscape versus the old school or old way of selling security of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and going in and scaring them and saying, there's bad things going on in your network, or you have all these code vulnerabilities. Really try to understand where they are today and what their challenges are and how we can help start addressing them. And we certainly don't come in and say, look, we're going to solve all of your security problems today. And it's simple. This is an ongoing continuous evolvement process, but you have to start now. And I think the preference is to start at the far left and bring security assurance testing at code commit and throughout the process and correlate all the different steps instead of the disparate approaches that are done today.
Sure. Mike, you mentioned GitHub and open source. You mentioned R programming. You mentioned algorithms, pulling images. All of these things are going to probably see a 10x increase with adoption of more artificial intelligence and data science capabilities. What is the impact of AI and cybersecurity? And the role of AI?
Sure. I think AI has a great long-term role in cybersecurity. And first, I'll go back and quickly define kind of the difference between AI and ML, machine learning, because I think often those two terms get conflated. And ML is really a subset of AI. So you can't have a machine learning solution without having data. And you need more and more data to train your model. So otherwise, if you leverage artificial intelligence and try to automate across the horizontal landscape, you will end up with a lot of false positives, even more false positives than with human capital. So first you have to figure out, what am I going to use machine learning for? What is my model going to be and what is my goal? And then as I get more and more data and feel more and more confident about the signal to noise ratio being high, then I can take AI approaches, which is what we're doing. And like I said at the start, our goal is to get to this holy grail of self-driving security or automated remediation. So eliminating the need for manual interaction for many simple cases and trying to improve security resiliency.
So that's, in this new world where we have things like low effort coding by citizen developers, where we have cloud developers that like provide these very minor things happening all the time. I mean, how much is this helping you with that? Much more data available, many more situations available that you can actually go through and actually look at, machine learning episodes and things like that, right? So this is made for you. You guys doing great with this.
I mean, it's a long journey for us, but if you look at the data that's coming and going back to GitHub, like somebody forecasts there's going to be 111 billion new lines of code written this year. So that's new lines of code versus existing. So going back to what I said about the rise of the developer. So with all those new lines of code, I'm sure we'll see the same vulnerabilities such as SQL injection and cross-site scripting that we've seen in the past. Like, we're not getting better about doing input bounds checking, et cetera, at this onset. So now if you can think about us providing this notion of kind of a Microsoft Word spell checker for code security. So as you're committing code, we can check it and say, look, you may want to go back. We've seen this before. We think this is a vulnerability. Here's how to remediate it.
I like that idea of the spell checker for security, by the way.
We had a guest on the show recently that talked to Ray and I about Amazon pushing code to production every 11 seconds. How does a CIO or a CISO respond to a digital economy where you have to be responsive, you have to have agile development, you have to adapt to your customers' needs? I mean, what type of questions should they be asking, or what type of analytics should they be looking for when they're working with a security provider or a security consultant?
So if you think about that high velocity of continuous delivery that all of these new kind of web 3.0 companies are doing, you can't take the old periodic, okay, I have this engineer running a scan every week, Friday at 2 a.m. or every quarter, and trying to look in the past. You have to start, once again, closing that chasm and taking a continuous approach. So what are ways I can go collaborate with the development team, find out, where are my critical applications, start there, and then expand across your application catalog. But really understanding what you're up against versus getting overwhelmed by the high degree of velocity. So I think starting there and developing a strategic plan and framework to involve security continuously instead of this out-of-band activity that it currently is.
That's awesome. I really appreciate the perspective. I've been doing technology for a long time, and like I said, security has always been an issue. But we've been talking to Mike Kail, CTO of Cybrick. You can find him on Twitter, MD Kail, MDKAIL. If I said that wrong, feel free to stop me and correct me. But Mike, thank you very much. We appreciate, and I totally agree with you that shifting left and going early in security is the way that we solve this problem. So appreciate you being here very much.
Likewise, thanks for having me.
Terrific.
Thank you. Vala, who's buddy next in the lineup, my friend?
I tell you, Mike is an amazing CIO and now CTO, and definitely one of the top security experts you want to follow on Twitter. Read his blogs. He's an incredible thought leader. And we're now delighted.
There you go. First show as a host and already screwing up. That's just like me.
We're delighted to to now follow the conversation with Jim Rutt, CIO at Dana Foundation. Jim, who's a certified information system and security professional, as well as the CIO at Dana Foundation. Dana Foundation is a private philanthropic organization that supports brain research through grants, publication, and educational programs. Check out the website, incredible content that's available to you. Jim's responsibility includes providing strategic planning for information and technology management and overseeing all back office technology operations necessary to support the foundation. He's an early adopter of cutting edge cloud security solutions, having led Dana through a complete cloud transformation that started, I believe, 3 years ago, and the journey continues. He frequently speaks to peer organizations on corporate cybersecurity strategy. There's a lot of content you can find on Jim on the web, and risk management, and he also advises early stage technology companies on their sales strategy to financial and healthcare sector. You can follow the work that Jim and his team and the organization delivers on Twitter, following @Dana_FDN, Dana Foundation. Welcome, Jim, to DisrupTV.
Thank you for having me, Val and Esteban. Pleasure to be here. First time. Very excited.
Oh, we'll make it easy. So follow along the algorithm I'm going to propose to you. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. So first question, really simple. I mean, Twitter. Come on, my friend. Everybody's on Twitter.
You got to be a Luddite somewhere in life, I guess.
So why don't we start with a simple one? I mean, can you tell us? I mean, Vala did a brief description of what you guys do at the Dana Foundation, but tell us a little bit more. What is it that you're concerned with? What are you guys doing? And some of the good stuff that you can share with us.
Yeah, well, I mean, the high-level concerns are no different than any other private organization. So I spent a majority of my career in healthcare, so I have kind of the HIPAA mindset, regulated mindset. So I kind of carry that over here at Dana. So I kind of take that approach when we developed our cybersecurity program, which didn't exist when I came here about 6.5 years ago. So it's interesting because, I'm talking about when Mike's talking about the progression of development, integrating security into the software development lifecycle, and then adopting cloud or kind of sideways. We did it kind of backwards. So we actually started our cloud journey 6 years ago. So we were looking to transform previous 2- and 3-tier applications like you would find in any traditional organization from an operational perspective into either private or public cloud. So we actually finished our cloud transformation from an infrastructure perspective about 2.5, 3 years ago. But all that time, we still were operating with a traditional waterfall-based SDLC. So we were very slow, although we were quick from the infrastructure side, we were slow to kind of bring on this lean, agile, DevOps kind of mindset. So this is something that we're working to implement right now. And I think one of the major drivers or the prime factor behind that is the maturity of these DevSecOps or rugged DevOps tools that we're seeing out there that will help to kind of enable the continuous monitoring, continuous integration kind of impact setup there.
So here's an interesting question, and this is from my mind, right? I mean, you're in a foundation, not-for-profit organization. Why do you need security? Who's going to hack you guys?
Well, well, you think about it. We've got certain amounts of research that comes in through grant requests that may or may not be proprietary. We have financial information as an endowment. We deal with a lot of investments, so there's certain pieces of information there that has to keep confidential. And overall, it's not a good idea to be totally open and facing because you never know what kind of future threat models are going to be out there that could affect you. So
makes sense. You, Jim, we heard Mike talk about technology megatrends that have made the security landscape and threat vectors even more complex. He talked about everything that's connected, so Internet of Things possibly. We talked about artificial intelligence and just complexity of software in general, mobility, social networking, cloud computing. these are all technologies that have definitely changed the landscape in the last decade. What are some of the technologies that are driving your future and on your radar?
So most of the time we're dealing with social media marketing. That's kind of a big push. Notwithstanding the fact that I'm personally not on Twitter yet.
We won't hold that against you much longer. The process,
exactly. I'll sign up right afterwards. So that represents to me a major vector of threat. In terms of some of the things that we do here, because there's significant brand damage that can be done, obviously, through these kinds of vectors, as well as just adoption of these wonderful software as a service and platforms as a service offerings out there that have enabled us to kind of de-abstract all these heavy layers of complexity. That has been a tremendous boon for us in terms of operational efficiency.
And I'm sorry. So how do you actually, when you look at your team, right? You're a CIO. You had to put together a team. You've been there for 3 years since you went cloud. So how do you actually do these things? How do you staff for that? How do you find the right people? Security is a hot topic right now. Everybody's trying to get in there. So how do you do these things?
Well, if you're talking about security, I find it very interesting when it talks about skill acquisition. I think part of it is obviously the threat landscape has gotten completely vertical in terms of being able to handle all these different situations. But, there's an interesting side effect to that as well. I think one of the other reasons why cybersecurity skills are so hard to pin down is because of the growing amount of tools that are out there as well. So you'll bring on a tool for a certain function, be it, say, incident response, forensics, what have you. And then 2 years later, you might need another tool, which means another round of subject matter expertise that you may need either on staff or have to outsource. So these kinds of things have a geometric kind of effect on being able to staff at any one given time the right amount of subject matter expertise for the tools that you're using, from a cybersecurity program perspective.
Okay.
Cisco just had research that said there's, I believe, 1 million unfulfilled cybersecurity jobs, 40,000 in the US, and I think there's a projection that by 2019 there'll be 2 million unfulfilled cybersecurity jobs. So it's a hard skill set to develop and certainly to recruit. So given you have, as a CIO, there's always a challenge of bringing the right talent, adopting the right agile lean processes, having a company culture that has that sense of urgency in terms of security. What advice do you have for CIOs in terms of what we were talking to Mike about, this continuous security and awareness culture? What do you
I'm sorry, like a continuous monitoring kind of thing?
Yeah, so exactly. Analysis.
I mean, excuse me, like we were just talking about, shifting left, earlier security, continuously doing it. So like, you don't have to be surprised at the last moment that something's not working or something to that effect, right?
Sure. So, when you're developing a traditional cybersecurity program for any organization, from the outset, you're usually advised to use like an industry standard RMF, right, a risk management framework.
Yeah.
Soup to nuts, it kind of details how you're going to handle threats, vulnerabilities, cycle them through the risk management process, come up with a residual risk that you're going to be able to manage. To date, most of these stovepipe kind of tool sets that try to fit in to each part of that, they don't talk to each other very well, or it's not easy to correlate that kind of data in front. So I'm very encouraged by these framework kind of tools that take a high-level GRC view of the cybersecurity program that fits much better with some of the standard risk management frameworks like NIST, Octave, CRAM, some of the ISO derivatives. So from a talent perspective, I think here we've got a pretty good culture in terms of, from the task worker, a good security awareness and education program. And for the practitioner side, for folks under me, we've got a good feedback loop in terms of training. We highly encourage, obviously, our folks to seek out training opportunities peripheral to their tasks and their duties. And I think, my advice to most CIOs is to keep fostering that learning culture. and to make those resources available to your staff, because I think innately most IT folks are very, very interested in cybersecurity in general, no matter what your role is, right? So I think the rub is there is that most of them are not really willing to go to bat to fund these initiatives. So that's something I would highly encourage.
So this is interesting. You know, I'm sorry, Vala, but you mentioned culture and you mentioned training and you mentioned, you know, collaboration, and Mike did the same. And this is not something you associate with security traditionally. I mean, security is more like you're in the dungeon, you know, with a big dark machine that nobody ever sees, and like behind 25 layers of, like, you know, passwords and whatnot. So how do you see this, you know, like the traditional, you know, security experts and the need for more security, you know, coalescing with this new model of like more collaboration, earlier time, more people involved, and all that stuff?
I don't think we have a choice at this point. I think the nature of the threats that are out there, the more psychological and sociological vectors of attack, like with phishing, social engineering, these kinds of things, I think a traditional dungeon-based IT security environment will not be able to sustain a proper program and protect an organization against these kinds of new threats and risks. I think we have to get our end users more involved. We have to get them better educated, and we have to impress upon them the importance of learning these skills peripheral to their tasks so they can kind of act as that front layer in your defense in depth.
Now, you're CISSP certified, and that's tremendous amount of commitment, continuous accreditation, and effort to sustain their certification. If a CIO doesn't have the budget to have his or her team become CISSP certified, what other routes are there for IT professionals to continue to sharpen the edge in terms of their cybersecurity skills?
Well, you know what? I think now more than 10 years ago, there's a tremendous amount of resources out there for free, as a matter of fact. So, you know, just perusing out there and doing Google searches on cybersecurity training, I found a number of great programs that are either very low cost or free, as a matter of fact. Plus, you've got these great learning management system type of websites like Coursera, like Khan Academy, even Udemy, which you know, you have to pay for the courses, but they're very, very reasonable. I think some of the content that is offered on some of these sites is tremendous. So there's always an avenue. If you're willing to put the effort in and you've got the commitment, I think you're going to be just fine. You'll have more than enough resources there.
But would those free resources get you all the way, or you're always going to need some partner, and you're always going to need someone to, like, you know, kind of get you you know, get you going?
It'll get you out of the gate, but I think the best teacher is experience. So, I mean, you'll get enough to kind of, you know, be able to lay your path and put into context of what you do, you know, practically in your position on a daily basis. And from there, you just kind of have to learn by trying. You know, I think most of the best experiences for me, you know, although they weren't necessarily at the time, were when I failed at something. So you were able to pick something up from that. And I think so.
You have the mentality for agile: fail fast, get it over with, learn, move on, and keep growing. It sounds like security is counterintuitive for that. I mean, you fail in security, and as you know, other companies, I'm not allowed to mention names, but, you know, as other companies have proven, you failed at security and you failed pretty big, right?
Well, you kind of couch your risk profile, so you don't take wild risks, but you kind of measure, you know, in those gray areas where it's not so, you know, clear what the outcome's going to be. If it's going to be, you know, if you're afraid of doing something, more often than not, you're probably losing out.
Okay, very, very interesting. So let's change a little bit on, like, you know, about your approach to this, right? I mean, every time that I think security, I think more defensive approach than offensive approach, I mean, or proactive approach, right? But you were talking about something that Mike also mentioned. I mean, if you shift left and if you start early on, you become effectively more proactive about it, right? How do you actually incorporate that into the thinking of your team that IT traditionally is more reactive?
Yeah, especially with when you've got a high-bound, you know, waterfall kind of step-by-step software development lifecycle mentality. That was kind of the biggest hurdle to kind of climb. So by impressing upon our folks that, hey, we can, you know, identify some of the internal threats that we have traditionally come across that could have been prevented, prior to a deployment into production of a solution. And showing folks, based on these new generation of tools that we're seeing out there, I think the folks are slowly getting the value of it, and they're willing to commit to the time to learn some of these great new continuous integration, continuous delivery tools, and like Mike said, some of these some great static and dynamic testing modules that will fit into a larger framework. So it's phenomenal.
Jim, you've mentioned the tools throughout our discussion. Are there some tools that you could potentially share with our audience in terms of technology that's helping you protect Dana Foundation?
Certainly. Can I make direct plugs for these companies?
You know what?
I don't know.
So we have our salespeople standing by to call them after.
I feel like I'm getting cut. So Cybric obviously is a major partner. Having seen the value of this, like I said prior, there's no value in trying to manage these stovepipe tools, individually, for the reasons that I talked about before. Having that nice big framework where we can slot these things in and have it directly, emulate, our CI/CD environment, and at each point in the process, have it auditable, have it monitorable. That's tremendous value there. Plus, the staff really like the tool. So that's kind of yeah, it's good. So from the left side, that's there. I can talk more about farther on the right side. So essentially, I think we, in particular, this is my own personal philosophy, but when you talk about basic communications inbound and outbound with our staff, we're getting closer and closer to almost a no trust kind of standpoint because of all these wild threats out there, like ransomware, like APTs, like social engineering. So we're using tools like Menlo Security, which kind of sandboxes or abstracts most of our email and other communication channels, so where we can kind of provide education at the point of communication or attempted mal-communication, I'll call it. Yeah. It has a lot more context, I think, than just, say, a generic phishing program where you're just trying to fool somebody out of band. And when the rubber meets the road, they kind of forget all that training, and then you still
yeah, it's interesting because I want to say we didn't plan it this way, but it seems like it's just a continuous flow from what we were talking about with Mike earlier about shifting left and all this stuff, and then your opinions here. And Jim, I appreciate your time very much. We're talking with Jim Rutt, CIO of the Dana Foundation, and even though he doesn't have Twitter for the next 30 seconds, because as soon as we get done here, he promised he will get it. You can follow Dana Foundation at Dana_FDN. And thank you very much for your perspective and your advice. And we're going to continue. We're going to get to, I think that Tim is next. That's right, Bala?
That's right. Thank you, Jim. Thank you very much for your insights. This has been an eye-opener. Often we may not always think about security, but obviously when there's an issue, it quickly becomes a boardroom discussion, and then ultimately it could impact your brand to a point where you could lose customers. And
speaking of boardroom, I think that we're a little pressed for time with Tim, but we want to make sure he gets to his board meeting next. So
okay, all right.
Go ahead.
That's always a challenge when we have a CEO on our show. So Tim Eades, CEO of vArmor, with over 20 years of leadership experience in sales, marketing, and executive management at the CEO level. Tim has deep expertise in driving high growth for computing, security, and enterprise software companies. vArmor, the data center and cloud security company, delivers a distributed platform with integrated security services, including software-based segmentation, micro-segmentation, application-aware monitoring, and cyber deception to help organizations protect critical applications and workload. Tim joined vArmor as CEO in 2013. Prior to that, he was a CEO at Silvertail Systems until the company was acquired by RSA, security division of EMC. He has held several sales and marketing executive leadership positions at BAE Systems, Sana Security, Phoenix Technologies, and IBM. You can follow Tim on Twitter.
Yay!
ADES50. Thank you, Tim, for joining us.
It's great to be here. Super nice to meet you guys.
Great meeting as well.
And let's try to continue where we started, right? I mean, we were talking earlier with Mike and Jim about shifting left and actually making security a bigger piece of the development life cycle, right? Especially in Agile, using open source and all these things. Let's start with the simple one. I mean, you know, is this something that your company is focused on? Is this something that you guys, you know, believe in?
Yeah, I think Mike hit the nail on the head. One of the biggest problems that people have is they have no visibility on what's going on in their environment. We were with a large financial institution the other day in New York City, and we were meeting them for Monday night for dinner, right? And there was a meeting was on Tuesday. And the Monday night we said to them, how prevalent are containers in your environment? You know, where are containers? Are you looking at containers? Because, you know, the environment is getting more east-west traffic, is more, you know, dense, virtualized and container environments. So I said to this guy, CIO of a bank, can you find out before the meeting tomorrow? So he sent some emails overnight and in the morning, and he turned up and goes, holy cow, they are everywhere. And I'm like, there's a thing like, you say to him, you can't see it, right? And he goes, no. And so they have such bad visibility that, you know, when you walk into an environment and say, how do you segment and protect, you know, this from that? They need sort of microservices, these containers, all these highly distributed environments are just lacking incredible visibility, and containers are everywhere, as an example.
So what is the role of security in this post-cloud, post-virtualization world? It sounds like it's not just to protect, but it's to inform so that you continuously are aware of the dynamic environments that you're supposed to protect and govern.
Yeah, so obviously the hackers have gone through this mode of, years ago they were all about glory, with, you know, the worms and everything else. Then they went into greed, and now you have nation states trying to disrupt. So the role of security is now trying to align with the business. So as you go through like a digital transformation, you have to like look at this, and the role of the cloud create a really interesting opportunity, because you can move to better architectures that are more aligned with the business, that you actually can put protection around the asset and work in closer to the asset. And it allows you to get, you know, better aligned. So the CISO can now have a really fantastic conversation with the line of business and change it. But it does mean that he has to walk away from his old architectures, the appliances, right? We always say, friends don't let friends buy appliances. But when you move to a software-based architecture and a distributed architecture, you can really align better with the business. And I think it's much more strategic for the CISO, to be honest.
But which I agree with you, but do you see that happening? Do you see the CIO stepping away from the old traditional tools and the like I was saying earlier, the dark servers behind 25 different cards and passwords and so forth, into a more modern model of security? Are you seeing that?
So it's changing. I always tell people, we were chatting about this the other day, that, you know, people only change when they're being forced to change, unfortunately, you know, these days. And so, you know, in the example I will give you is seatbelts in cars, right? In 1968, it became law that every car in America had to have a seatbelt, but it wasn't until 1984 that the law came past and said you actually had to wear the seatbelt. So it's changing, it's being forced among people. But I'll give you an example of how bad some of this stuff is. One customer that we're dealing with at the moment, the number one requirement is to separate the China network from their American network. I mean, and you're like, what? And let's say you're dealing with a global financial institution and you went to their South Africa office or their Singaporean office, and you go to a little office, right? And you unplug the phone and you plug it into the back of your laptop. With any basic computer skills, you could be in New York City, because they are designed completely flat. They're not they're not segmented off at all. Right. So yes, I think you can get alignment, but the journey is, I think we're not even in the first inning. I think we're just warming up. But the right organizations are starting to get that.
But this stuff costs money. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, your time is not free, and your product, I'm hoping it's not free either, right? So we just got off the not-for-profit. Now we're in the for-profit side. So how do you see your clients actually adopting their cost models, their revenue models, their business models to incorporate this, like, you know, tighter security that as a benefit doesn't really deliver revenue per se, but it's a better operation?
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's where we're getting a lot of support at the board level and the chief financial officer level, because the public cloud has changed the way that people design IT, deliver IT, and price IT, right? And so your ability to deliver things as a service now, including security, from great companies like Zscaler do this really, really well too. But you deliver it by the drink, as opposed to buy a box, plug in the cables, look at the lights, and manage them all separately. Your ability to deliver policy as services and security as services to better wrap and protect assets aligns with the CFO's goal of transforming it. So budget access becomes easier if you can get to that level, because the mentality is changing. I mean, if you're still selling load balancers or firewalls or IDS appliances on boxes, and it's a tough model for them.
Yeah, yeah.
You just you mentioned public cloud. I think you just mentioned Cisco. I just saw Cisco's marketing stack, and it consists of 39 companies, all in the cloud, all of them.
Right.
So, what makes delivering security in a multi-cloud environment different than supporting one cloud? And by the way, I don't know any enterprise that only has one cloud. So,
just on the record, Vala believes in multi-clouds. I believe in a single cloud. So we can argue that later. So.
I don't know. I'm a multi-cloud guy. I gotta say. I think
Esteban is in his own little world. But okay, go
ahead. Multi-cloud, right? Because I mean, the system of records of Active Directory will go, with Microsoft, and Oracle Financials. Oracle's going to come back in the cloud world because they're going to move that up. No, I think the multi-cloud environment, we play very well in regulated environments, right? And so the regulators has put a lot of kind of concerns and pause into financial institutions to embrace public cloud. But I think what happens is, as you move to containers in particular, if you Dockerize your VPC, then you can start to, and we announced this with a customer back in February, where you can take a container, wrap it with a policy, and literally move it public, private, wherever it may be. And because you understand the residency of that app and the provenance and its original, its state of origin, you can be compliant. And then multi-cloud becomes a reality, and then you can burst and move it wherever you want to move it. So I think managing security in a multi-cloud environment today, obviously you can do it, but I think the way to do it is to look at an orchestration system and leverage containers to make it true multi-cloud. If you do that right, you get incredible efficiency, and you don't compromise your security. To be honest.
So let me ask you a similar question that I asked Mike at the beginning, right? Who do you talk to mostly when you go to your clients' organizations? Are you at the board level, or?
Yeah, no, we go into the CISO, right? And we talk about application discovery and everything else, and application discovery and application monitoring. But here's the other thing: you've got to understand the policies. Some of these things has had firewalls in there for 80,000, 100,000 rules and policies in these things, right? So you have to discover the policies, the application dependencies, and everything else. And you start with a CISO, because you only segment what you care about. And if you don't understand the traffic, you don't know where to put the segmentation in place in the first place. So the visibility is a CISO, because he understands and owns policies and governance typically. But the infrastructure guy has to get involved if you actually want to put something in line and segment it. So you start with the CISO and see what he cares about, and then the infrastructure guy can help implement it.
And then how long does it take you to get that basic understanding so you can have a useful meeting, right, with your customers?
Yeah, I think Tanium did a great job when they started to come out to market really strong. Tanium were able to look at making it simple. It's the most important thing, because you can't scale the complexity. So we put all our product managers and our engineers in a room, led by my CMO, and just said, think like a Norton antivirus product manager. If it took you 40 hours to install a product, nobody would give a hell, right? So we went it down, and even though we do data center security, which is incredibly a complex topic, is abstract the complexity to the user in 15 minutes. So you can literally install it in 15 minutes, but it was a hard fought battle internally to make people think, make it simple. And so it's 15 minutes to install. You can even segment within an hour, but it was a it was a drive across the organization, across everybody, including people like QA and engineering. You've got to make it simple, otherwise nobody cares.
Yeah, sure. Have you met or worked with Dr. Elisa Johnson? She's the CISO at Xerox.
No, I have not.
And she was the former CIO at the White House. She's incredible. Wow. She's incredible. Maybe one of the top CISOs that I know. You guys should definitely connect. She's a leading edge, super innovator, and she's looking to transform Xerox. So we'll make the introduction.
These organizations that go through those transformations, if you can get the board support and the chief financial officer support, obviously sometimes it's the culture that you fight more than anything else.
Right, absolutely. So, at Constellation, the research, there's an expectation of nearly 200 billion connected devices to the internet in the next 3 years, by 2020. Yeah. About 3/4 of these devices lack secure communications. What can be done to protect an organization at the edge when it's not just the employees, Apple Watch and next-gen Google Glass and sensors in their shoes, but all the other things that are connected in a smart building, for example? How do we protect against them?
Yeah, I think the thing about IoT and stuff like that is what's going to make it a lot worse is when you go to EIoT, right? When you can do e-commerce over IoT. Right. So you walk into a hotel and you're connected, you're buying your gin and tonic as you're walking up to the bar. And so when everything's connected, like the port of Hamburg is a big IoT place, right? You can attack it. But when EIoT hits and you're making money off this stuff, then the attack surface becomes really something worthwhile. And I think that gets really challenging for the consumer as well as the enterprises and the hotels, whatever it is. I think you just like with all things these days in security, you've got to start with hardening the inside and then building it out. So whether you do segments or secure enclaves or trusted circles with ServiceNow and people like that, there's a variety of different ways to look at it. You should always start with the AAA stuff back from the old days.
What's the easiest or the first thing that you actually look into? Like you said, start from the inside, hardening things out. In your experience, in all these meetings, in all these things that you do in implementations, which do you say is like the most common first step that you can take to actually make this, stick?
Yeah, the biggest thing is starting with the most critical application, right? And we're back to your Active Directories, you're back to your payment applications. I mean, one of the customers we're working with, we do that billing application, right, for all of their customers. So as these attack surfaces get broadened, you literally got to start back with, okay, let's start with the basics. Who can access what? Because the first thing what happens in the breach is, right, who had access to what? Privileged access controls, and what had access to what? And so it's way worse than you would ever dream, to be really honest. Most networks are completely flat and they don't segment things off. And so I think you start off with your most critical applications, your databases, your Active Directories, your payment applications, your billing applications, your Epic application if you're in healthcare, right? And start to secure this stuff off. It's crazy. It's in many ways, it's obviously as an entrepreneur, it's great. There's a great market opportunity. But as a user of tech, it's really disheartening because you're like, wow, surely your China network should be separated from your American network. And they're like, that's a great idea. I'm like, what? How is it new?
As a serial entrepreneur leading a security startup, are there some lessons you can share? It's great to have CEO on the show. So lessons learned, life, business, leadership lessons you can share with our audience. And that's my final question.
I think start a company with a purpose, right? Build a company with a purpose, and never get away from that. I think the cause that you start on and the drive needs to come from a center of gravity that is unwaverable. Then I would leverage number one. Number two is know that the journey is the reward, right? I mean, at my last company, we nurtured a bunch of people through, and a whole load of them have become CEOs now. And they've all got promoted up and they all kind of live and move on. So the experience that you have is incredible. And then I guess number three would be invite people into the cockpit. A lot of these people have never been in the cockpit of a company before. And if you can, they have the skin and the appetite and the aptitude, put them in the cockpit with you. You know, they learn, they grow. The sense of loyalty is incredible. I guess the fourth one is we do a lot around customer centricity. So we have customers come to the company probably every 3 or 4 weeks. We have customers present at board meetings. Because you know, VCs have two sides of their brain, right? Fear and greed. And they move between the two pretty quick. But if you can have customers come to your board meeting and say, solve their problems, that's really valuable, then it's just fantastic. I mean, and you do that inside the company too, the center of gravity becomes around customers and the purpose that you deliver to them.
So Tim, I've been known to destroy last names before. So if you don't do me a favor, and how do you pronounce your last name?
Eades. It's Scottish, but don't tell anybody.
We're talking to Tim Scottish Eades. We're talking to Tim Scottish Eades. Thank you very much for being here. We want to make sure you get to your board meeting. We've been chastised enough on the backside of this, but we really appreciate the lessons. We really appreciate what you're doing. He's the CEO of vArmor. He could be found on Twitter. Our Eades 50. I'm going to destroy this, but I'll spell it out for you. EADES 50. So you either are very young looking 50 years old, or you're a very younger looking 67-year-old. Thank you very much for being here, Tim.
Thank you, Tim. You were great.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, guys.
Thank you.
So Vala, here we are.
So we had a CTO, a CIO, and a CEO all teaching us about cybersecurity. And this is why Ray and I consider Friday afternoons our best time of the week.
So what did you learn?
What's that?
Give me your lesson, your number one lesson you learned from the last 55 minutes.
That in order for me to get a question in, I have to do this. No, I think that, when Mike talked about, and this is my experience selling actually security products to CIOs before I joined Salesforce, this notion of, the first Tuesday of every month, we're going to run a scan, and then we're going to take a week to analyze the data, and then hopefully we'll take some action just so we can meet the auditor's requirements. That type of mindset is gone. And if you're not, I used Amazon as an example, but there are plenty of digital native companies, especially cloud companies, that are pushing code to production every seconds, minutes, days, surely on a weekly basis. So the notion of protecting at a point of time and not continuously is kind of a ridiculous notion now. I also, when I heard Mike talk about SDLC, there's that planning and requirement, architecture and design, test planning, coding, testing and results, and then ultimately releasing and maintaining. There's like 5-6 stages to SDLC. And the notion that you have proper change management, security talent, and ability to communicate and collaborate broadly across an organization to go through those 6 stages properly, having that proactive mindset, as you said, meaning being involved early on in designing for security, that doesn't exist in most companies. So you need to partner with a Cybrick. You need to partner with an organization that'll bring that culture of urgency and talent, because if you do it on your own in your traditional security shop, you're going to get crushed. It's just a matter of time. Every business is vulnerable. You just, and you're just hoping that you're not a target of some bad guy or bad group.
What was the most interesting part for me is, like, I've been in this business for a while, like you have, and I've seen security come and go and, different levels and everything. But what it reminded me of is, like, back in the old days when I used to do consulting, we're talking before the cloud, traditional waterfall, software development lifecycle, et cetera, where we used to say, security was not an issue because everything is behind closed doors in my own data center, behind my own wall, so we didn't think there was a problem, right? But we used to say, we have training. If something goes wrong, we can always come back on training, right? And it sounds like security is the training of the 2000s. It's like, we don't need security. We'll just put it at the end. We'll do a scan every Tuesday, and then we'll figure it out. But I'm telling you, Mike and Jim, especially Jim with the transformation from traditional waterfall to agile. He put it on the line. He said, as you move to agile, as you develop these things fast, it's just we're done. You need to put all this stuff, like you said, do it and get it done. But anyways, Friday afternoon, we learn. We're done. Episode 67, Vala. I won't be here next week, which means you get to ask more questions. More.
Well,
So,
next week I get to ask questions of Kelly Walsh, CIO at College of Westchester. He was named top 100 social CIO. Melissa Vu, SVP of Information and Technology CIO at Stony Brook University, and Paige Francis, Associate CIO at the University of Arkansas. So we have 3 higher education CIOs. All 3 are incredibly social, and they're going to be our guests next week. And perhaps we'll bring up cybersecurity as a topic as well. Esteban, thank you very much. You're in the DisrupTV Hall of Fame as soon as we establish one.
And I'll never be a co-host again. I can see that, but at least it was fun, the only one.
You're
And
a default co-host. Anytime Ray and I are not available, you're the co-host. So keep polishing those interviewing skills.
Thank you, sir. And Vala, thank you very much. And I know you know this because everybody already follows you, but you can follow Vala in Twitter at Vala, VALA_AFSHAR. And if I got it wrong, he'll correct me, but if not, close enough. Thank you much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Talk to you. Bye-bye.